Grazie a tutti di essere qui così numerosi. Io mi chiamo Tiziano Antognozzi, modererò l'incontro di oggi. Intanto facciamo un applauso ai nostri ospiti, Alex Kammer, Jeremy Crawford e Jon Peterson. Okay, we switched to English, guys. Sorry, it was a preparation. We are able to do the whole panel in English, so you guys be more entertained and on ease to answer. Very quick introduction. I'd like to just ask very few questions and let you guys speak about this, since we have such an illuminated group of people to speak about this. As if somebody did not notice, this year we are celebrating 50 years of Dungeons & Dragons, so a round of applause. Today we wanted to have a discussion, since we have such premier people in order to do this discussion about the cultural evolution of the game. I mean, 50 years, it's a lot. Me, myself, I'm 39 years old, and this game is older than me, and I feel old at times. So it must be pretty much enfranchised. The game arrived in Italy in between the middle of the 80s, but as we know, the game was released with a famous brown box in 1974, and it was, getting worked also in the previous years. In order to prepare the ground a little bit, I wanted to ask to Jon whether you'd be able to help us in, dividing in chapters this history. If we are to divide these 50 years in chapters, it's a game we can play together. I'm curious about the opinion of every one of you, but if you were to divide this history in chapters, how would you divide them?
Well, so we actually did this exercise for a book we wrote called Art and Arcana. There is an Italian edition of that, you may have seen it. And what we chose to do to divide that book up was every time a new set of 3 core rule books came out, that was a chapter. And so we had 9 chapters. There's now a 10th chapter that we would be adding on to the end of this. But we had 9 chapters in it that really reflected the release of the original brown box, which contained 3 little booklets. But then the release of the original Player's Handbook, Monster Manual, and Dungeon Master's Guide in 1977 through 79. And then, of course, those were iterated in 1983. Things had changed a bit by then. There had been a kind of dramatic turn in D&D's fortune nobody anticipated that happened between the Dungeon Master's Guide release and then. And then, of course, the second edition, which came out in around 1988 into 89. They did a second version of the second edition as well in 1995. But things weren't going that well for TSR by that time. Tactical Studies Rules, the original partnership that published D&D, had, been eclipsed by several other things going on in the gaming world, one of which was a small card game called Magic the Gathering, published by an upstart company in Seattle called Wizards of the Coast. They then acquired TSR famously and rescued D&D from almost certain death otherwise. Which brings us then to 2000, when they released the first Wizards edition of D&D, the 3rd edition, followed then by 3.5, followed then by 4th, and then in 2014, something the gentleman to my left here had no small involvement in, a 5th edition of Dungeons & Dragons.
Since we were touching it, these 2 boxes, of course the red box is not the first D&D edition, but I believe it's the first one which got released in Italy, and this picture is actually from the Editrice Giochi version. By the way, this, for those of you who do not know this, the first Italian translation has been done by a guy called Giovanni Ingellis, and this very same room is called the Sala Ingellis on purpose. So, it's a very important guy, and let's give him an applause since he's not with us, unfortunately. Mr. Crawford, it has been said that one of the coolest aspect that you've done, that you achieved on the 5th edition and the new version of the 5th edition, is to being able to compress the very best of this history that Jon just described. Is that something you were trying to achieve? Was that your goal? And in general, how did this happen?
So when we were developing what became 5th edition, and it started as D&D Next, our goal very consciously as a team was to delve into D&D's past. We viewed it as like going into this mine and mining for jewels and gold and silver and electrum. And we wanted to take as much of that as we could and see, could we synthesize it? Could we combine it into a new edition that combined the best of D&D's past with also modern design sensibilities? And we viewed this as a course correction after we had spent 2 editions in some ways pursuing the new more than honoring the old. And as exciting as that pursuit of the new was, I mean, we did a lot of exciting design experimentation in both 3rd and 4th edition. But as those editions went along, part of the message that we received from the community is it seemed with each passing year, D&D seemed less like D&D. And that for us was sort of an existential crisis for the game. Because for us, D&D needs to always feel like Dungeons and Dragons, because who else can be D&D but D&D? And so that capturing of the riches of the past, shining them up, recombining them, not only informed how we created 5th edition a decade ago, but also informed how we made these revised core rule books that are coming out now. Because back then when we were making the 2014 rule books, there was, you know, the amount of time we had then, and so there were some of those jewels from the past that we hadn't had time to fully contemplate, hadn't had time to play test them to our full satisfaction, or we had ideas that this might be interesting to do, but maybe next time we'll do it. And so this is that next time. And it has really been a joy to be able to return to these books and continue the work we did 10 years ago. And really unprecedented in the history of the game. And our historian here nodding that no other team that has made the game has had the chance to come back and sort of continue their work. Because really, and any of you have written something before or painted something or done any other kind of creative work, you know you could really keep working on it forever. And the deadline, or when you just decide you're done, that just sort of is a photograph of the work at that moment. And we knew as we were finishing 5th edition back in 2014, there were all these other things we knew we already wanted to do. And so we were already then starting to plan for what we're doing now.
Alex, as the organizer of what has been called the best role-playing game convention in the world, Gamehole Con, I don't know how many of you know the convention, but
Thank you.
is the mecca of role-playing right now. And also a revered author of and dungeon master. What can you tell you about the impact of both the 5th edition so far in terms of the long history of D&D?
Yeah. So 5th edition D&D was launched almost at the same time as Gamehole Con became a thing. So in my mind, they're inseparable entities. They are so intertwined, and I could not be happier about that fact. Not only has it had an axiomatic impact on our convention, meaning that it has been the largest game that has been played every single year of our convention, and it's brought so many new players into this hobby. The breadth of our hobby has exploded because of 5th edition D&D, which has been nothing but fantastic for our convention. If you look at our Adventures League hall and you see the array of players that are there, all playing simultaneously a game they love, it's moving. It's hard to even believe that this is happening, especially since, you know, the Gamehole is just a group of knuckleheads who get together and play D&D once a week. And we had this idea, and here we are. It's crazy. And then for me personally, as I've told Jeremy several times, 5th edition D&D, D&D Next, got me into authorship and design. I now have all kinds of authorship credits. I've been hired by all kinds of publishers, done a lot of work with Wizards of the Coast, because I adored 5th edition D&D. It was a return to the best elements of the previous editions. It echoed things that I loved from when I was young playing the game, and then removed a lot of parts that I didn't. And it made it simpler, faster, easier. I wanted to tell stories using that rule set. So 5th edition D&D and the 2024 revisions that I am just still getting, I'm just learning, are massive and incredibly important for Gamehole Con, no question about it.
I mean, we all know about also the cultural impact that D&D is having in these last 10 years. I mean, we might want to touch the topic again during our discussion, but real quick, as you guys were speaking, a detail came to my mind which emerged from the panel we had with Jon and the artist and Jessica just yesterday. We asked to Tyler Jacobson to describe a little bit the process of the new handbook's artwork. And a few very interesting details emerged. I mean, there's definitely two details. The dragons are different, okay? And the party is different. Tyler told us how he used the artistic language in order to achieve that specific goal. And I was wondering whether this concept resonates with how you approached the work on the player handbook. I mean, do you wanted to... What the comparison between these two covers tell us about the game?
When our art directors and I began talking about what we wanted on the covers of the new core books, and so this was before we had even approached Tyler, we wanted a combination of the old and the nostalgic, but with the new, because that's the spirit of 5th edition itself. We wanted you to be able to see things that have been in D&D from the beginning, but remixed in a way that feels fresh. And we also, because it was the 50th anniversary of D&D, we also wanted to lead with a gold dragon because of that notion that, you know, a 50th anniversary is the golden anniversary. And so that's why you see gold dragons and everything for the 50th anniversary celebration. We also realized, just as D&D nerds, that we had never featured metallic dragons on our covers before. And so we thought, how about we put one of our iconic good dragons on the cover and show it teaming up with heroes to fight the red dragon, which you can see is down in the foreground. And I like to imagine that that red dragon is the red dragon from the red box, now being faced by this group. And group is really pivotal to this image. We wanted to emphasize, especially for the player's handbook, that this game is all about a group of people, each bringing different capabilities together to face amazing odds and come out triumphant. And as fresh as this looks, every one of those characters is actually from D&D's past. And so it looks new, but the group of characters in the foreground, those are characters that appeared at different times on stickers in the 1980s, as action figures in the 1980s. So these are actually old-timey characters that we wanted to bring back, and then we had them join with Queen Yolande, this amazing, powerful wizard who appears. And even though she has not been depicted in our art in years, she's also actually a very old character in D&D because she's from the world of Greyhawk. She was the queen of the elves going all the way back to D&D's beginning. And so in a way, you can almost view this painting as the artistic representation of 5th edition itself.
Since we touched the topic a few minutes before, Jon, let's measure this 5th chapter of the history that you just traced for us. Compared to the 4th chapter, okay, Do you think it's okay to say that the game became more popular?
I don't know if there's an Italian translation of that, but it's focused just basically on the years from 2012 basically up to when we published it, so that'll be 2023. And, you know, it was a book really out looking for the answer to just that question. What happened? How did this happen? In this digital world, this world of video games, this world where, you know, what could possibly make a tabletop game where you sit around and roll dice with your friends suddenly become a phenomenon? And I believe the figure Wizard cites is 50 million people played D&D. That's a lot. And I don't think anybody saw it coming. But when we look at it, I think there are some clear reasons why we should have. And, you know, certainly one of the factors is the popularity of fantasy and the fact that fantasy had become so much more mainstream, not just thanks to Peter Jackson, but obviously thanks to George R.R. Martin and Dan Weiss and Dave Benioff, who did the Game of Thrones television show. You know, this had made dragons part of the popular imagination in a way that perhaps they hadn't been before. We can look as well to the rise of actual play, which from my historical perspective, I look back to Acquisitions Incorporated and to the earliest podcasts that were even thinking maybe a good way to get people to understand D&D is just to release on the internet transcripts and eventually videos and audio and videos of people playing, of funny people playing, and of people who have like wacky adventures that once you hear them or see them, you say, I could do that. I could go home with my friends and do that. And this had been a nut that D&D had been trying to crack like forever. What is the best way to introduce people from the rule books to this game? And if you look at the long, long history of basic or introductory sets that were put out by TSR in the first, 3 decades that they were around, you'll see they had a lot of trouble figuring out how to do that. But actual play cracked it, and obviously, people like Critical Role and Dimension 20 and the many other fine people that are doing actual play contributed enormously to this. And again, no small part of it, I think, is also the edition for all editions. As I believe it was once called in a D&D Next panel that you attended, circa 2012, that the goal of D&D Next and of 5th edition was to create an edition for all editions. And I think it worked.
Jeremy, as we had many editions across these 50 years, also the public changed, right? The community changed, the fans changed, and they might feel, have varying feelings towards the phenomena that Jon just described, right? Is it a daunting task to try and create, something that tries to make everybody agree on the new edition? I mean, do you have like this feeling that you have many different people to satisfy with this?
We are faced by this fact every time we release an Unearthed Arcana article and then receive feedback from, and sometimes we, on an individual survey, will get feedback from as many as 10 to 13,000 people on each survey. And it's always clear as we go through the feedback that everyone so generously sends in, because we all know it takes time to fill out those surveys. And as we go through it, sometimes what one person wants is completely opposed to what another person wants. And so often our task is to figure out, is there a third path that we can take that has the best of each of those other tasks, each of those other paths in it, so that we can create something that will appeal to as many D&D players as possible. And again, this idea of synthesis is at the core of all of 5th edition. We're always looking for what is that thing that brings the most joy to as many D&D players as possible. How can we bring it in? And then also, how can we put in some spice that will also please maybe another group of players who might be in a minority among the D&D community, but we might find there's a way we can please them too, while still keeping the core of the game solid and on the track that feels right for the majority. It's not easy. Sometimes we don't succeed. And one of the things I love about it being a living game is we just keep iterating, we keep trying, and so if we see that one of our attempts, we miss the target, well then we always see the very next book, we're going to try again. That is part of what keeps the D&D team so passionate and engaged, precisely that it is a living game, that we always will, there's going to be another chance. If we don't get it this time, we're going to get it the next time. And if we don't get it the next time, we're going to get it the next time. And we view kind of what we're doing is, it's almost like we're all playing a D&D campaign together. And in many ways, you can think of each product we make as an adventure we go on together. Sometimes it is literally an adventure, but sometimes it's a supplement. And sometimes the supplement or that part of the adventure ends with everyone marching off with armfuls of treasure. And sometimes, we have a heartfelt lesson that we ponder for the next time. And the way we view it is, whatever the ending of each of these chapters, we always end up enriched and have new perspectives for where we go next.
Alex, we were talking like 15 minutes ago about cultural heritage for other reasons, okay? After visiting the exhibition and hearing, these discussions, and especially when Jeremy's telling, there's many people who feel they own a stake on the game after all, right? D&D is really starting to get some sort of cultural heritage status. Just a few days ago, we inaugurated one of the sotterranei of Lucca to Gygax and Arneson. How do you feel about this? Do you think this is something that the community actually realize?
Whether we, all of us realize it or not, it's happening, and it's freaking awesome. Let's just state that. For us, of people of our age who played D&D under very different circumstances, often we were made fun of for it. Often we had to be careful about who we even told that we played the game. Not for any threat of physical harm necessarily, but you certainly, at least I should speak for myself, I shouldn't speak for you guys, was concerned about my friends thinking I was cool or not. Man, that's all gone. That is now done. And that is, I think, a function of what Jon mentioned, the cultural phenomena. Add in Harry Potter and just one thing after another, where we have elves and dragons and gnomes and stuff. This is just commonality now. This is all a common language that we use culturally. And also, people like my age who have kids, and we raise them with this stuff. Just this afternoon, I ran a game over at the D&D exhibit, and if you haven't gone, you really should. He's not kidding. You absolutely should. This is an amazing opportunity to see this. I've waited 40 years to see this, so you should absolutely go. But I had a 13-year-old boy, a 14-year-old girl, and their dad in my game. That's what's happened too. So we have these stakeholders, us older folks who really care about this game and we really want to pass it on. And then kids that are growing up in an era where it's cool, right? Who's cooler than Matt Mercer? There's no one cooler in the world than Matt Mercer, right? No one is. Everyone wants to be Matt Mercer. It's not, sure, it used to be a center fielder for the Yankees or whatever, but now everyone wants to be Matt Mercer. And that's just the fact. And so we have this cultural phenomenon that's happening, and there's no stopping it now. The nerds are taking over, and it's finally happening, and I love it.
I might be wrong, but I guess there are some nerds in the room. Might be wrong. Jon, as we keep going down memory lane, okay, collective memory lane, as we just found out we are cultural heritage stakeholders. Let's talk about a period in which maybe being nerds wasn't that cool, or at least even dangerous. The satanic panic of the 80s. How it did affect D&D?
Think about it like D&D came out of the wargaming community, largely, in the United States. And these were people who played these conflict simulation games, maybe set in like the Napoleonic era, something like that, right? And it was largely concentrated around high schools and colleges in some cases. And that was really kind of the vector through which D&D initially spread. And it branched off quickly to science fiction fandom, which was its own kind of like nerdy and like, definitely not mainstream thing at the time. Star Trek was what transformed that community and kind of made it into something that had begun to understand itself as something to be taken seriously. But, D&D would have kind of remained this phenomenon that was isolated basically to high school and college kids that were into conflict simulation or into fantasy fiction, except for one thing, that in 1979, in really the same time that the Dungeon Master's Guide, the original one, came out, there was a disappearance of a college student in East Lansing, Michigan. And for whatever reason, this private detective that was brought on board to try to find him after the child had been missing for a week or so, lighted on this bizarre theory because he'd heard there was this cult game that kids had invented, he thought, on this college campus. It was called Dungeons and Dragons. And the dungeon, Egbert, the child who disappeared, must have believed that the steam tunnels underneath the university were a dungeon. And he thought the game was real. And he was down there somewhere, maybe lost, by this time, maybe dead. And he relentlessly broadcast this message to any journalist that would listen. This was on the front page of papers in the United States. It was on the nightly news in the United States. And often he would obligingly hold up a copy of the Holmes Basic set as he did this. And this turned into a publicity bonanza for TSR. It turned out, of course, this child was not, in fact, lost under the steam tunnels and was, in fact, in Louisiana. And when he heard all this publicity, he just, called home, and they took him home. But none of the newspapers wanted to retract any of that sensationalist coverage that they'd been promulgating previously, right? But because of that, the game took on this kind of cachet. I mean, this is the game that drives kids crazy. This is the game that makes them think they're going to go into the steam tunnels and have real adventures. And this, of course, led to a number of, especially fundamentalist religious communities, starting in Utah in the United States, to put restrictions, sometimes outright bans, on the play of the game. And as this whipped up more and more fury, necessarily it just created more and more publicity. And for D&D, sales went from a company making a little less than $1 million a year to 2 years later making $20 million a year. And without that, I mean, it's unclear. Probably some other lightning would have struck that introduced us all to D&D, but we cannot understate the importance of the Satanic Panic in both elevating D&D, but also giving it a bit of this questionable reputation.
It was pretty different age, right?
Very much, very much. I mean, this was happening all throughout the late 1970s into the 1980s. This fellow named Ronald Reagan, he was president of the United States in the early 1980s, and there were a lot of fundamentalist Christians who were very opposed to heavy metal music. They were very concerned about premarital sex. They were very concerned about people who smoked the demon reefer, things like, and Dungeons and Dragons, of all things, this nerdy Dungeons and Dragons gets lumped in with all of that. And there's just amazing footage. You can find some on YouTube, I'm sure, still, of some of these televangelists talking about the dangers of D&D and stories of parents witnessing their child summoning a demon in their bedroom with their D&D manual.
So good.
So a different time, yes.
Something that I was thinking while John was speaking, that something that is definitely different nowadays, it's also, let's call that the community infrastructure, okay? I mean, one of the things that really bewildered me as I was trying to study D&D history was that we are so much used today to, like the digital age and connection and on. I'm pretty sure that while you guys work on the game design, you have so many inputs. You have, so many aspects that you didn't consider. You have so many information on things people would expect, and you can choose whether to satisfy those or not. But still, the community in the 80s, and even back then, was really resourceful. And like this magazine, which I just posted, was probably one of the tent poles around which the community was gathering, right? I mean, were you a reader of the Dragon? And what was your opinion on the kind of bottom-up processes that were ignited because of this magazine?
So yeah, I subscribed to Dragon magazine.
I knew that.
Back when I was a kid. I would read every issue passionately. We would even integrate some of the experimental rules in Dragon magazine into our home games. It really was the lifeline for many of us to the broader gaming community, because back then we didn't have the internet to reach out to people, and it was really just through periodicals like Dragon and then in-person conventions where we could meet other gamers from other towns. Now, I was very fortunate to grow up in a university town where there were actually tons of gamers. And so I got to meet many of them, even got to meet Dave Arneson at a convention in my town, along with Gary Gygax. And so we were sort of unusually blessed, the amount of gaming that was going on where I grew up. But even with that, I always each month looked forward to the next issue of Dragon magazine, and then years later Dungeon magazine, to see basically what's going on out there. What ideas does everyone else have? Whereas now today, we can just pick up our phones and see what are other D&D fans thinking.
Alex, it came to my mind that, I mean, one of the most relevant examples of those early, fans which were writing on the journal, sending letters and on, and then turned out to be relevant VIP people of the game, was one of your, I know he comes to Gamehole Con every year, and Ed Greenwood is probably a great example of these guys who were, after all, involved, right? I don't know whether you know him, or if you know about how the Forgotten Realms got included in the canon.
Yeah, Ed is a dear friend and a wonderful person, and I've been fortunate enough to know him for many years now, and we've done 8, 9 collaborations on different Forgotten Realms things, Adventures Leagues things. We have one coming forth too. We have a book on Tethir that's going to be, we're just starting to work on. But anyway, Ed will famously tell you that the Forgotten Realms pre-existed Dungeons and Dragons, and he's right. He was writing stories about a place called the Forgotten Realms before D&D was released. So, Italians, Europeans can certainly empathize even with Ed's position. He's in Canada. I'm in Wisconsin. I'm in ground zero. I had D&D was born just a few miles from where I grew up. Jeremy was in an academic town. That's where D&D spread the fastest to college campuses. But Ed, it was in rural Canada, so it's an outpost. So Dragon magazine truly was a lifeline for him. There was no going to conventions. So yeah, he started submitting things to Dragon magazine. And you can see some of Ed's earliest work and some of the early issues of Dragon. It is pretty wild. And that's how he got the attention of the powers that be at TSR, because he's writing stories about the Forgotten Realms, and eventually led to folks like Jeff Grubb and so on reaching out and saying, hey, how about we purchase that from you? And I guess I'll leave it there because Ed should tell his own story and it shouldn't be Kammer. But that's exactly right. If it's not for Dragon magazine, we likely do not enjoy the Forgotten Realms. And my gosh, I can't imagine that.
Yeah.
Alex, you just reminded me that the very first thing I ever read by Ed Greenwood was an article by him in Dragon magazine, not on the Forgotten Realms, but on the 9 Hells.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
What are the 9 Hells?
The 9 Hells are one of the outer planes of Dungeons and Dragons, and it is the primary plane of lawful evil, and is where the devils dwell. And I remember reading that article by Ed with great fascination.
Deep in the satanic panic era, I understand, right? He was not avoiding it.
Yeah. You could find stats for Satan, by the way, in a Dragon magazine in 1979, right at the time Egbert disappeared. Somebody sent in. They gave stats for Satan. Just a coincidence, I promise.
Let's go back again, okay? Even down memory lane. John, you released this book here, right? This is a project.
I mean,
in Italian has been released this year, but probably even in English, right?
I mean, it's a book of facsimiles. It really wouldn't make sense to translate the little bit of text I wrote into Italian.
We could be doing. And I mean, you've been assigned to edit this book, okay? Can you tell us what is that about? I mean, is that your celebration of the 50th anniversary? I mean, how do you feel about it?
Oh, well, I mean, so Ray Winger first approached me about this actually back in May of 2021 and asked, hey, we should do something to commemorate the history of D&D for its 50th anniversary. You're my first call. What should we do? And I said, I know exactly what you should do. And there then ensued a number of calls that Jeremy and Chris and the rest of the design team were on, where we actually explored so many different possibilities for things we could release as a commemorative product. And, you know, these after a long series of kind of should we do this, should we do that, you know, we lighted on this idea of trying to publish the documents that show how the original D&D game came together, to show kind of what Gary and Dave were working on prior to it that were precursors to D&D, show a bit of their correspondence to show how they started collaborating on it, to show draft material that to date, before this year at least, not a lot of people had been able to see before, and then to reprint in their entirety the original first print box set with the hobbits and balrogs and ents intact. That was very important to us. Along with the first 3 supplements and a bunch of kind of just related articles and ephemera from things like Dragon Magazine, from the Strategic Review, and so on, that I think if you were to sit down and read it cover to cover, my hope would be that this could actually immerse you in what the process of the unlikely, bizarre process that led to the creation of this game really was. I mean, Jeremy, you're an insider. I'm just a contractor. You speak to it a bit as well, yeah.
So this was a book that Ray, Chris Perkins, and I very selfishly wanted made because we wanted all those facsimiles in a book. And so I am delighted that it came together so beautifully, because it's a chance for everyone to see the game in its most primal form. And it's really inspiring when you look at this book to see not only how far the game has come, but also how much of the game's magic was there in the beginning. I always love being reminded of the fact that any of us who work on this game are standing on the shoulders of giants. And it is why I view so much our work as, even though it is a privilege, it's also a responsibility to make sure that we're protecting that magic that was there from the beginning, even as we at the same time appreciate how far we've come.
At first, when I understood what was the operation, I felt really surprised by the ingenuity that has been put in it. In terms of that, I would have not taken for granted that, I mean, such an official endeavor, which is, I mean, the book is published by WotC itself, right?
Yes.
I mean, to preserve it while also trying to understand how the contemporary reader would approach it, even maybe a very young one who, without biases, would, I mean, fall into this text by its own self. And especially in the introduction by Jon, I mean, you had to take some care of the potential reader, right?
Oh, certainly, yeah. And I mean, let's get real for a second on this. I mean, Wizards has been doing facsimile reproductions of texts for some time that are released online through Drive-Thru RPG and so on. And they attach these a legacy content disclaimer, is what it's called. And this basically says, this was a work that was published a long time ago. If we were going to be doing a work like this today, we might not make the same choices about the way certain people are represented in it, or if certain subjects are represented in it. And at the same time, we're not going to change anything about it, because to do so is to kind of, you know, just to pretend like those issues didn't exist at the time they did, right? And since, you know, when I was first approached about this, I was well aware this is a book of facsimile reprints. It was going to have a legacy content disclaimer on it, right? I mean, there's just no two ways about it. And I do understand that, you know, there are people who are upset about the presence of a legacy content disclaimer in a book like this. And, you know, from my perspective, the value of having this material out so outweighs, I think, the concerns that people have about, whether that legacy content disclaimer is exactly phrased the way that they would like it to be. That, to me, I would make this trade-off again 10 more times if Wizards wanted to do 10 more of these books.
Jeremy, the other night at dinner, you used a very nice metaphor describing, how big this community can be. You were talking about a house.
Yes.
Can you tell everyone your idea of community?
Sometimes we've all been in communities where as the community begins to grow, there will sometimes be anxiety by those who've been in the community for a long time about those newcomers. And the fear that maybe the newcomers will change the character of the community so much that it will no longer feel like home. And what I was saying is that with the D&D community, this isn't a physical house that has limited space. This isn't a place where there are limited resources. The D&D house that we're all in together has infinite space inside it, with infinite resources. And so my vision is that we as D&D players and DMs, what we do is make shit up. And to me, we can absolutely use our powerful imaginations to create space within our community for everyone who wants to join us in the joy of shared play, who wants to come in and try their hand at playing a character or building a world. And so my feeling is that I believe in the D&D community. We are creators at heart, and I hope that always we will be pouring our hearts into, first of all, creating space for each other.
I was wondering, how do you feel? It's not the first time you come in Italy, of course, and not the first time you come to Lucca Comics and Games. Although I don't know whether the last time you came here, the festival was this big, so it might surprise you a tiny bit. But in these years that we've been working with D&D alumni from abroad, one of the most striking things and emotional, moving, I must admit, is to see people coming from far abroad, where the game was actually created, and come here and see that this heritage is alive. In 2019, together with Gabriele Ceni, big round of applause, please.
Yeah, Gabriele!
Is Lucca Games coordinator and one of the guys behind that beautiful exhibition in Chiesa dei Servi. And in 2019, we were working with WotC to have an D&D activation in another dungeon, okay? And he came up with this idea. While we were pitching the idea, he said, the presentation was like, we have dungeons, you bring the dragons, okay? And how do you feel when you come from, you cross an ocean and you kind of find something that might be familiar to you, even here, which is so far away, and these old walls feels like a perfect fit for your stories. How do you feel about it?
I feel that here at Lucca, we're experiencing exactly what I was talking about of the D&D house having infinite space inside it. Because it's almost like when we enter the D&D house, there are portals to other parts of the world, and I feel just as at home here as I do at Gen Con, as I do at Gamehole Con, as I do at PAX Unplugged, that as soon as we all get together, whatever language we speak, whatever our background is, if we felt that magic of D&D, we feel like in some ways we're family.
And I like to remember also where I met my friend Alex. We, in 2020, as we were facing COVID and the impossibility of organizing such events, him as an organizer of Gamehole Con, me, I was working with Lucca, and David Hopp from Gen Con, Richard Denning from UK Game Expo, and John Stacey from Gamma. We created some sort of informal table, virtual table, where we will meet every 2 weeks and just share what was going on and what shall we do, okay, in those dreadful times. And it feels like we were saying to each other that it feels really strange that we are already in the position where this feels like an old past. Yeah. As an event organizer, I wonder, I mean, what's the role in order to keep this cultural heritage alive of events? I mean, it feels, I remember how we felt in 2020, and we really miss this, right?
Yeah. Boy, that all started when I texted my friend David Hoppy, who is the CEO of Gen Con, and said, what the F are we going to do? And he said, hey, let's jump on a Zoom quick tomorrow. So I did, and we started talking about virtual conventions, seeing is there a future? Is there a path past COVID? Are we going to be able to get together in person again? And then he quickly, wisely said, hey, why don't we reach out to some other friends and make this a little more robust discussion? That's how that was born. Yeah, man, we tried to figure out how to do stuff like run virtual conventions. We had no idea how to do that, and all of us, how to make an interactive map of a vendor hall that doesn't exist, and all this kind of stuff. And like most things that are challenging, we became better for it. I'm sure your organization got better. Ours certainly did. It helped think through some issues. Our electronic infrastructure, our website became so much more robust as a result, and so on. But I can't state it as well as Jeremy did. I can only echo that sentiments. When it comes to gaming conventions, it's exactly the same thing. As I walk through Lucca, and first of all, you all have been so welcoming and so warm. I thank you so much, by the way. I feel it's just been amazing. It's just been amazing. You see young boys, you see young girls, you see old people, you see middle-aged people, you see people of every flavor enjoying their fandom, enjoying gaming, enjoying comics. That's what Gamehole Con is. We have it doesn't look any different except for not in a medieval town. Beyond that, it's the same vibe, it's the same joy, it's the same passion, it's the same excitement that we're all together to celebrate something that we all love. Because the pie is getting larger and there are more and more people getting into it, nothing's being taken away from anyone. Actually, the opposite's true. Look at what's happening to our hobby. Like my man there's got a Mothership shirt on. That's a freaking great game. We didn't have Mothership that long ago. It's because of the tentpole that is D&D and its success that there are tremendous RPGs out there. Tremendous ones that are not D&D. We collectively think of them as D&D because they're role-playing games that we wouldn't have if it wasn't for the explosion of Dungeons & Dragons. And man, again, there are so many great games and there's so much room for all these games. You can find every kind of game that you like, and I'm delighted the impact it's had on my convention. It's so awesome to see that it's here, the breadth and diversity of the attendees. It's amazing, amazing.
Thank you for the chills I get every time you use the word we. Every time we've been talking about this anniversary in these days, there's a constant attention in like entitling this to the community as a whole. And despite the fact that we revere our demigods, Gary Gygax and Dave Arneson and their work, which is, we also found a way to preserve in the correct way. It still feels like those stuff that we have seen in the Chiesa dei Servi, it's a process and it belongs to everyone. So thank you all guys for the job you've been doing. Thank you. And as we think of the monsters of tomorrow, our time is over. So please guys, a big round of applause to Alex Kammer, Jeremy Crawford, and Jon Peterson. You've been an amazing crowd. Thank you, everyone. Go and watch the exhibition. Go and watch the dungeon. Go inside and play. Enjoy your Lucca Comics and Games 2024. Long live D&D.